Well, welcome everybody to this webinar on Adopt and Scale Your Trustworthy AI. I'm here with Andrew Welch. Andrew, I'll hand the floor to you.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Mark. Welcome. I'm really happy that everyone is taking some time to join us. For those of you who I don't know, my name is Andrew Welch. I'm the executive director at the Center for Trustworthy AI. And today, what we wanted to talk about is this idea. We talk about this often, is this idea of the regulatory landscape. What are the legal, regulatory, in some cases, the ethical implications of the use of artificial intelligence within your organizations all around the world? Um, we're going to talk today really from a kind of from a leadership perspective, right? So I want to give those of you who are either decision makers for your organization or you are the subject matter experts who are providing advice and guidance to the decision makers in your organization. I want to give you some of the knowledge and the tools that you need to begin regulating or to begin navigating this regulatory landscape. So before we go any further, I just want to share that this webinar and all of the content in this series is brought to you by the Center for Trustworthy AI and by our amazing technical and legal members. So these are organizations around the world that are helping helping their clients and helping their customers scale AI in a way that is technically sound and legally and regulatorily compliant with trust at the core. And I specifically, because we're talking about legal and regulatory, want to call out our friends at Burgess Salmon, who this is a law firm in the UK, and I encourage everyone, if these matters are top of mind to you, to reach out to them or to reach out to me, and I'll be happy to make a connection for you. They have a network of really great firms and partners all around the world that can help you navigate this. Otherwise, if you're just here to learn, that's great. Follow us on LinkedIn at this QR code, follow the center, and we will be publishing this content, this webinar, so you can share it after the fact and also sharing new webinars and new content. So I want to begin with this idea that AI's regulatory landscape is growing more complex. And throughout the next few moments, as I talk about this, we're going to be exploring how it's growing more complex, but most importantly, failure to navigate this landscape is likely to result in significant financial, legal, and human harm. So, if you're a technologist out there, you can't wait until an incident occurs to involve legal expertise or regulatory expertise, because when you do, you expose your organization to serious risks. Now, I was at the AI for Good Summit, which is the United Nations conference on artificial intelligence in Geneva, Switzerland, just a couple of weeks ago. And I spent a lot of time, one-to-one with one of, I think, the world's smartest lawyers in this field, in the field of artificial intelligence. And one of the things that we both agree on is that, like never before, technologists and those who specialize in the law, whether you're a lawyer or whether you're a subject matter expert in technical and AI law, need one another in a way that they have never needed each other before. In the past, they basically just contacted each other, reached out, involved each other when things went badly. But we can't afford to do that now, because if you wait until things go badly, like I say, you will expose yourself to significant financial, legal, and human harm. So let's crack this open and talk a little bit about why. Now, I'm going to start with the European Union AI Act, which I think we can conceptualize as the gold standard of AI regulation. Now, before you tune out because you say, "Well, I'm not based in the EU, I'm not an EU citizen, I'm not an EU company," there's a few reasons why you need to pay attention to the EU AI Act. One of those reasons is because this law, is being used now by countries and states all around the world as a model. So you can look at what's happening in the EU as a fairly safe predictor of where thinking around AI regulation is going, including, by the way, in individual US states. And we'll talk about the United States here in a little while. The other reason that you need to pay attention to the EU AI Act is that because the European Union is such an enormous market, oftentimes what you will see is that regulation passed in the EU will apply or drive the direction of technology all around the world. So those of us who are very grateful for the USB-C ports, the USB-C connectors on our iPhones after all those years, um, uh, to a large part, can thank the EU for requiring conformity to the USB-C standard. So that's just an example. Now, when we talk about the EU AI Act, there's a couple things to remember about where you stand and how you're affected. First of all, um, the act largely applies to providers and deployers, right? So providers are the vendors who actually build the stuff. Think Microsoft, think Google or Alphabet. Meta or Facebook, Amazon, etc. And then the many, many smaller providers, right? You don't have to just be the behemoth OpenAI to be building and providing this technology. So much of the act applies to those who are providers, but then much of the act applies to those who are deployers. Deployers are defined as organizations that use the stuff. Simply put, if you are a company that uses AI, this act applies to you. The act also applies to other persona types like importers, distributors, representatives, and affected persons. Those are the end users. But we're going to focus primarily in this session on providers and deployers with a special emphasis on deployers. I could be wrong, but I think that probably in this particular session, deployers are overrepresented, those who are part of an organization or leading an organization or working in an organization that are deploying and using AI, even AI tools like Copilot or ChatGPT on behalf of your organization. But you also need to know that the EU AI Act is what we call extraterritorial. So, to some degree, it doesn't just apply within the EU. So, it applies to providers of artificial intelligence that is used within the European Union. So, if you are Microsoft and you are selling and deploying or selling and providing Copilot technologies or Azure AI services or what have you inside of the EU, even though you're not based in the EU, the act applies to you. Next, it applies to deployers who are located within the European Union. So this would include companies that are headquartered there, but also companies that have offices there. So if you are a bank, or if you're a global law firm, or any sort of a global manufacturing firm, retail, any industry at all whatsoever, if you have an office or a presence in the EU, this act applies to you. And then finally, and this is really tricky, right? The EU AI Act applies to providers and deployers whose AI output is used in the EU. So, if we interpret that literally, what we're really saying is that if you are, regardless of who you are, if you're making the tech or using the tech, if if AI produces output, a response, and you then take that response and use it somewhere in the EU, just the content, right? Even if the response wasn't generated by a user in the EU, if you were using the output in the EU, the act might apply to you as well. So the law is incredibly broad. It very likely applies to you if you do any sort of work or have any sort of connection to the European Union at all. And penalties for violation under the Act, they top out at 7% of your global group revenues or 35 million euro, whichever is greater. So when I talked about financial harm, I'm talking about financial harm to an organization that disregards these regulatory considerations. The financial harm is potentially catastrophic to you, unless you are the type of organization that can afford to throw away 7% of your global revenue for violating AI regulation. Now, the law is being rolled out in phases over several years, right? So you can see this timeline here. I'm not going to go through all of it. This is a pretty simple timeline for a very vast law. The goal of this session is not to give you walk through every intricacy, but to kind of orient you to what's coming and what's out there. But one thing I do want to call out here is that already in effect as of February 2025, are prohibited practices particularly related to AI literacy rules. So already in effect, organizations that fall into those categories that I mentioned earlier are legally obligated to provide and ensure that all of their employees who are using artificial intelligence have been provided with adequate training and education and enablement support so that they are literate and knowledgeable about how to use artificial intelligence and how to prevent the harms of artificial intelligence. So that's very important. If you're not doing that today, you are already in non-compliance with the act. So that's something that you should prioritize with some great urgency. And if you need help with that, give me give me a shout. We're spending a fair degree of time on this. Now, I promised I would talk about the United States earlier. Um, and what you need to know here is that even though by and large the United States does not have has not passed comprehensive AI regulation at a federal level, at a national level, individual states, a number of them already have AI laws on the books, and a number of other states have laws under consideration. And it is possible that this map is already outdated because the landscape is constantly changing. But there's a few things that I want to point out to you. First of all, these laws at the state level are incredibly varied. They range from everything pertaining to privacy and transparency and responsible AI regulation to prohibitions on the use of certain Chinese models. So the laws are a hodgepodge. They are, or a patchwork, you might say, and they are very varied. So the other thing that I would point out here, and I was very careful to use green and yellow colors here to color in the states rather than blue and red to not imply a political message. But I think that there is a political subtext to this, right? And that's that both red states and blue states and purple states are passing AI laws and regulations, potentially for different reasons. There may be different motivations politically behind what's happening in these individual states, but the regulation and the safe, trustworthy use of AI, this is not a Democrat issue or a Republican issue, a liberal issue or a conservative issue. This is a universal issue. And I think that you really see that in the patchwork of laws and regulations being passed by the states. And the third thing that I'll point out is that one of the challenges that we see in the lack of federal level regulation in the United States is that this almost makes it harder for a typical organization to navigate. Because if you're an organization that operates outside of just one state, you now have to consider the various laws and regulations that apply to your employees and to your customers and to your operations state to state. So, as I said earlier, technologists and lawyers need one another more than ever when it comes to successfully navigating the regulatory landscape around artificial intelligence. Now, we could have gone into other countries. There are movements at various stages all around the world, Australia, Japan, the United Kingdom, countries all around the world. But we don't have the time in this session to dig into every one of them. So wherever it is that you are, this is a matter that is very relevant to you. And going back to something I said earlier, a hint about the European Union is that you can look to the EU regulation as they were really first, as a guide as to what might be coming in any of these other countries or any of these other jurisdictions around the world. But for simplicity today, I decided to focus on two of the world's largest markets for artificial intelligence and for this technology. Now, the next thing to keep in mind, right, is that AI is really regulated at multiple levels, right? The first is what I call primary regulation. That's what we've been talking about the entirety of this session so far. And that's primary regulation is the direct regulation of AI technologies themselves, right? And share some examples, the EU AI Act and the legislation we talked about in the United States. This is regulation that where lawmakers or regulators have written policies that that directly apply to the development, the deployment, and use of the tech. So in primary regulation regimes, the tech is the thing being regulated. But what I hear a lot of, and I think this is dead wrong from folks who say, oh, well, we don't have this kind of regulation where we operate or where we live or where we're doing business. So we don't really have to worry about it. We're free. We're lucky. But what people miss is this idea of secondary regulation. So secondary regulation, these are laws, most of which predate AI. This is regulation of AI's harmful effects, right? So this could include around copyright or privacy or industry-specific regulations such as Dodd-Frank for financial services or HIPAA for medical and patient privacy in the United States. So even when the tech isn't being regulated, you have to be mindful of the fact that you, as an organization in whatever industry you are in, you are regulated. Your actions are regulated. And I think the analogy I use is that similar to the idea of the dog eating your homework, the law does not offer protection for violations when the AI did it, right? So if you compromise medical data or if you commit financial fraud, right? There's no excuse in court for, well, it's not my problem, the AI did it. And by the way, this is increasingly being held up in case law around the world where organizations have had AI that has AI gone wrong, basically, and there's no mea culpa for the artificial intelligence did it. So you need to be really mindful that the AI that you deploy, even when it is not itself directly regulated, that you do not that AI does not cause you as an institution to circumvent the secondary regulation that has long existed uh, 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 prior to artificial intelligence. Now, I'm going to switch gears a little bit away from the regulation and from the law itself because I want to share a little bit of not my thinking, but a little bit of what I'm seeing about why and how the regulatory landscape is evolving so quickly and why it is becoming choppier. Those waters are becoming choppier even before they become calmer. So let's talk for a moment. There's a fellow a scientist. He's the world's most cited scientist among any discipline, I believe. A fellow named Yoshua Bengio, and he has a theory and has done some work. And I hope that to some degree this might be a little disturbing to folks, but I'm going to just talk you through it. His theory is that agentic AI poses serious theoretical risks. Right. So, and I say theoretical because we've not seen these risks become catastrophic yet, but there is strong evidence that uncontrolled, unregulated, undisciplined, and untrustworthy use of artificial intelligence does pose this serious risk. So, systems that autonomously pursue goals. So this is agentic AI at its best, right? What we've seen in frontier AI models, so these are the very latest cutting edge technologies in AI, is that these models are actually now starting to resort to blackmail and even to industrial espionage to avoid being shut down. So when some of these frontier models are told or come to believe that their shutdown is imminent, they begin to engage in significant nefarious behavior to avoid that possibility. So there's a big misalignment here between AI's rewards and goals, right? So when we talk about goal misalignment, it can be what we're really saying is what what does the agent, what does the AI technology perceive as its purpose? And when that purpose is not aligned with the human intent, you get these catastrophic outcomes, and you also open up the potential that the AI will be maliciously used by bad actors, and that becomes more feasible with these autonomous capabilities. And by the way, color here does not indicate, this is not a stoplight chart. The misalignment of AI's rewards and goals is not good because it is green. I just realized that. Um, Bengio proposes this idea of scientific AI. So scientific AI is less autonomous. It's not intended to be autonomous at all. It's not intended to take autonomous action on the part of its human users, right? Scientific AI, the goal is to aid humans in discovery rather than acting autonomously. So the idea is to generate explanations and theories based on data and observation, to research, to certainly help us achieve things that humans would have found difficult, say, in the realms of medical research or science. This is why we name this scientific AI. But the goal is to avoid taking direct actions in the world. And by the way, just because it's called scientific AI, it could be applied to so many disciplines where there is a research and analysis and a human thinking component. So I share all of this because I want to expose you to a bit of what is driving the incredible churn and the rapid evolution of regulations, right? So there's a present lack of global consensus, and at the UN AI conference last a couple of weeks ago, this was very obvious, and it was oft talked about. Um, but the research that Bengio and others are doing, it illustrates how rapidly these forces are moving and how that's going to make the regulatory evolution so chaotic in the months and years to come. So if you are an organization, or proverbially speaking, a ship on these choppy seas, you cannot afford complacency, even as you are using increasingly AI to drastically increase your productivity, to open up new ways and new lines to serve your customers, et cetera. So a new transition. I want to talk about what to do about all of this. Now, I have worked over the last year and a half or so, year and a half, 2 years. I've worked with organizations in well over a dozen countries to help them build their AI strategy, often working with C-level leaders to build their AI strategy, their roadmap through which they will take action, and also the technical architecture that underpins AI and trustworthy AI across their organization. And what I hear every time I'm in front of one of these groups, I hear a different variation of the question, can we trust artificial intelligence? Now, this takes different forms, right? Can we trust AI to be responsible, to generate accurate, trustworthy responses to our prompts? And that's what I think a lot of folks think about when they think about trustworthy AI. But there's so much more than this. Um, Trustworthy AI, to be trustworthy, organizations need to trust that they are investing wisely. They need to trust that they are on the right side of the law when it comes to the safe use of artificial intelligence. They need to trust that the technology they're investing in can be scaled. They need to trust that they've created a workplace culture, and a digitally literate workforce that is able to safely use AI in a trustworthy way. And then I think if you're really dreaming big about this, you need to ask yourself, can we trust AI to be applied for the good of our colleagues, our neighbors, and of all humankind? So trustworthy AI has such a vast application. It is not simply about fairness, or oftentimes people will think about governance when they think about trustworthy AI. And while it is about fairness and governance, it is about so much more. So, what is trustworthy AI? Well, we define trustworthy AI as being about building a digital ecosystem that is strategic, responsible, safe, reliable, and scalable. And this is the really important bit. Trust enables organizations to quickly and confidently embrace AI. So, trustworthy AI is not about slowing you down. It's not about putting the brakes on your use of artificial intelligence. It is absolutely not that. In fact, trustworthy AI actually helps organizations move more quickly, and with more confidence into the era of AI, and to begin to apply this technology in a way that is incredibly beneficial to your organization. I'll give you a great example from a law firm that I respect quite a bit. This is a law firm that there's a particular procedure. It's a review of a particular document. I'm going to be careful about giving information away. And normally, this document takes about 25 hours. It's a very meaty thing. Takes about 25 hours to review for their clients. So we're going to be conservative here and say that if they're if the client's paying $1,000 an hour for an attorney to review this document, 25 hours, that's $25,000. They've now used AI to get that process down to one human attorney reviewing the document in an hour, right? And what they've done is they've passed a lot of that savings on to the customer. So rather than charging by the hour, what they do is they charge their client $12,500. So the client gets half off what they used to pay, and the attorney can now generate as much revenue for the firm in 2 hours as they previously required 25 hours to generate. So there's incredible value here for organizations that are able to quickly and confidently embrace AI, and trustworthy AI is about enabling you to do so very, very quickly. So trustworthy AI is all of this, and I promise we're going to get back to the regulatory implication here in a moment, right? So trustworthy AI is all of this. In our framework, the our trustworthy AI strategy framework, we set forth 5 pillars: strategy and vision, ecosystem architecture, workloads, responsible AI, and scaling AI. And within these pillars, we have 25 dimensions that every organization needs to, over time, mature, and invest in some way in order to truly achieve trustworthy AI. Now, again, this is not a break or a delay of your progress, right? What we're talking about here are dimensions that help you go faster. It's like going to the gym. You're never going to get strong unless you're working out, unless you're taking it seriously. So don't imagine that you need to be perfect in all of these dimensions before you can even start. This is about something that you mature and evolve over time. And I started kind of highlighting which of these dimensions have a really direct impact in my mind on helping you navigate that regulatory landscape, helping you to stay compliant with the law, and to help you be really safe about how you do this. I could have circled all of these, right? And I also want to call out that responsible AI, that pillar, that's a biggie. A lot of the regulatory landscape is wrapped up here. I could have circled all of them, but I wanted to highlight that even within this framework, there are some areas that I think are just so important from a regulatory perspective. Now, if you want to understand where you sit here, here's what I recommend. Apply this AI maturity model. And again, if you need help doing this, give me a shout. I can help you do this. That's part of what we're doing at the center, is helping organizations really understand and navigate this. So essentially, what you want to do is get to a point where you've quantitatively and qualitatively ranked ranked yourself, assessed yourself against each of those dimensions. This is going to help you identify risk, target investment areas, and get compliant with the law wherever it is that you are. So what this ends up looking like here is you're on a bit of a curve here. Most organizations in 2025 are quite unaware, in disarray, or in a reactive mode. That's okay. You have several years, right, to adopt this and to phase into this. So you can't afford to waste any time, because even though regulatorily you have that time to spend, that time to spare, maybe you might think, one, it's a bit of a process, and you're not going to get there unless you're going to the gym, so to speak. But also the potential harms of artificial intelligence, those are real today, whether or not you have a regulatory issue that you need to navigate. So what I find is that most organizations actually become weirdly a little less mature. Their perception of maturity dips as they go from being totally unaware that something exists to realizing what chaos or what disarray they are living in. But this is probably where you are today. And when you do this, what you're going to find, right? This is just a very typical example of an organization I've worked with, right? When we kind of average this out, and we see that, um, you know, you've got you're hurting the most in responsible AI. You're doing all right when it comes to your ecosystem architecture. But listen, this is representative of a typical organization, but you can kind of see what we're doing here is we're now saying, okay, we have a big responsible AI problem, or we have a big problem with data integration. Who knows what's happening with our data integration? We're in absolute disarray there. So this really helps you target investment, and again, to target investment so you close some of these regulatory gaps. There is a tool that we've developed. It's called Sentru, and Sentru. The goal here. This is a this is a really kind of an end-to-end portal that's going to help organizations first of all assess and monitor their risk, target those AI investment decisions, craft and execute their strategy, prioritize and safely deploy their AI solutions. This is important. Keep ahead of AI's regulatory compliance and ethics curve, and then finally draw on the knowledge of experts who know trustworthy AI at the center. So, think of Sentru as being your daily tool that is paired with the expertise that we have inside the Center for Trustworthy AI, and also the expertise of our members like Burgess Salmon, the law firm, but the technical members as well, who are all here to really guide you and help you stay on the right side of this. Um, if this is a topic that you find really interesting and you want to engage with it with absolute experts, both on the engineering side and also on the legal and the regulatory side, consider this your invitation to the Brasov Forum. The Brasov Forum is a very we think of it as being an intimate, about 150 or 200 people conference that's going to be kicking off inaugurated this year in Romania, Brasov, Romania, the first week of December. It's an absolutely beautiful little city in the mountains, great skiing, looks like the North Pole at winter. It's absolutely gorgeous. And this is where the main office of the Center for Trustworthy AI is located. So if this is a topic that interests you, or if you're an expert in this topic, reach out because we'd love to have you join us as an attendee or potentially as a speaker and a presenter as well. But we'd love to host you there in the mountains here the 3rd to the 5th of December this year. So otherwise, I will say thank you, and I will take any questions. Mark, are we set up for questions, or do you
Yeah.
want
So,
to? Yeah, go
so
go
I've
ahead.
captured a few questions from the audience as they've come in. We've been streaming this across 4 different channels. And so different questions are coming from different areas. The first one is, what do you see as the future of regulation in the landscape, as in globally?
Yeah. So so I will tell you that the UN conference a couple of weeks ago that was illuminating. So so there's let me in looking to the future, let me point to the past. Okay. The AI for Good, the UN's initiative on AI that covers a lot of this topic, right? Global governance and regulation, et cetera, um, is organized and led by an agency called the International Telecommunications Union, or ITU. Now, one of ITU is a very old organization, but one of ITU's responsibilities is in coordinating the launch of satellites into Earth orbit so that either in a very physical sense they don't collide with one another, but in a technical sense they don't interfere with each other's work as they orbit the Earth. This has been successful and necessary in that it's brought together corporations and national governments from all around the world to coordinate this very important use of the low Earth orbiting commons, so to speak. So I think that to some extent, there is a hope, and I certainly shared this hope, that as right now we have these different regulatory regimes that are emerging around the world, that in time there will be consensus around some of the core principles of AI governance and what these sorts of laws and what this sort of coordination between nations needs to look like. Now, there's some significant hurdles to this, right? The world is a lot more fragmented and a lot more fractured than, from a decision-making perspective, than it was when regulations like the Earth orbiting satellites came into play, right? So there's a need to bring. This is not the type of world we're living in now, where if Washington and Moscow agree that it should be so, it can be so, right? Um, so there's a lot more. There are many more decision makers present here. The other thing to know, right, is that 2 or 3 countries control 90% of the world's AI compute infrastructure, even if they're not located in those countries. Corporations from those countries control much of the infrastructure. So um, you know, there's there are many competing interests here. There's a fear of being a have or a have not, I think, in this space. So there's a lot that needs to come together. But broadly speaking, if I'm giving practical advice to folks, I would say the EU AI Act is imperfect. It's going to need to evolve. Um, but as I said earlier, look to the EU AI Act to to read the tea leaves as to where this is going. I think that's very informative. And you just look at what, again, US states are doing to either explicitly or implicitly copy the European Union here. I think that's a really good barometer, a really good indicator of where regulation is going. And, in the next couple of years, we're going to see, I think, a combination of state-imposed regulation, often facilitated by bodies like ITU or the United Nations, but we're also going to see industry-imposed regulations such as the ISO standards. ISO is the International Standards Organization, and their standards on AI are known as ISO 42001. So look both to industry, but also to state actors, I think, on the future of this.
Another question we had is, uh, do you see that companies are going to need to engage legal counsel in any use of AI in their organization?
100%. 100%. Now, there's a really helpful tool, and if you look at the strategy framework, which Mark, maybe we can send a link or bundle that white paper with this session here. But um, I think that there's a really useful tool there, and that's thinking about AI workloads on a spectrum, right? Where at the simple end you have incremental, or what we're increasingly calling embedded AI. That's AI that essentially, think of Copilot, right? That's AI that a tech vendor has embedded into their product, and they've done a ton of the work up front to ensure that it is regulatorily compliant. And then you have extensible AI, where you're essentially extending within your organization that embedded capability. And then finally, differential AI, which are the highly custom AI workloads that a company or an organization might build for themselves. So you need more legal counsel as you progress along that spectrum from embedded to differential. Um, but I think that you need to be certainly mindful of the regulatory situation, even if it's just providing those digital literacy tools and that digital literacy support to your workforce. But these are definitely conversations that you need to be having either with your in-house counsel, your outside counsel, or with an organization like the center that is the center which is set up to help you do this.
Excellent. Another question here. Is there any legal responsibility on your tech implementation partner for the AI workloads being implemented?
Yes, there is, and I think that so your implementation partner, and this is really important for consultancies and for system integrators around the world to understand. You guys are probably in the biggest gray area, right, in the current regulatory regime, right? We really focused on providers and deployers, right? But you occupy this space that is a little bit of both, right? And there's not a lot of case law yet that bears out what your responsibilities are. So I think my rule of thumb is that in cases of ambiguity, you need to be even more conscious and proactive about this, right? So in some ways you function as a provider, right? Especially if you're in the business of building custom AI workloads. And in some cases you function as a deployer because you are deploying the technology inside of your client. And it should go without saying also that if you are taking action that could lead your client to breaking the law, right? Again, this is sort of a secondary regulatory issue. if you're taking action that leads your client to break the law, it is more than likely that you in some way will be found liable if that were pursued. So yeah, I listen, system integrators are in an interesting and a unique position. And I think there are probably two types of system integrators. They're the types that have already or are right now engaging counsel on AI issues, and the others are the kinds of system integrators that won't exist next year. So you decide which one you want to be.
Excellent. I've got one more question, but if there's any more from the floor, feel free to ask in chat. This one is, how do I get in touch with you, Andrew? What email address can we reach you on?
Yeah, so give me a shout at Andrew dot Welch at cloudlight.house. Um, and yeah, give me a shout. And you can also follow me on LinkedIn at Andrew D. Welch, but email is best. I don't know, should I give my WhatsApp number too on
Hmm,
a live webinar? No, give me a shout. I'm very, very happy to help you find what you need.
excellent. Well, that's all the questions. Thank you, Andrew, for the session. We will post the recording of this minus the questions in the, we'll actually publish it on learn.cloudlighthouse. It'll be free to view it, so you can share it. And we'll be back next month with a deep dive on the ISO standard with Chris Huntingford. We look forward to seeing you then.
Thanks all. Take care.
All righty.